a race where strategy ultimately made the difference between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen in Spain, and it was the smallest points gap once again between the top two, as the fastest lap for Red Bull and Max Verstappen meant he only lost 7 points to Lewis Hamilton ahead of him on this occasion. There are a few talking points to look at, so here's my 5 things we learned from the Spanish Grand Prix. Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. A class of their own. The first point to look at is the fact that Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton were in a class of their own this afternoon, as once Charles Leclerc got past Valtteri Bottas on lap 1, which held the Finn back and kept him behind until the pit stops, it meant that the top 2 drivers were off into the distance. So it's a green box for me for the top 2 drivers being just in a class of their own once again for the 4th time this season out of 4 races. And as we've seen at every race so far this season, it was a battle at the front between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, with their respective teammates out of the battle for one reason or another. It ended up being a battle of strategy between the front two, as it was the Red Bull team that blinked first, bringing Verstappen in for his stop 5 laps before Mercedes did the same with Lewis Hamilton. And despite a slow stop for the Red Bull mechanics, they did enough to keep him out ahead of the Mercedes driver once Verstappen was able to make the most of his fresh rubber. But once Hamilton made a stop for himself, he was rapid on those fresher tyres and started making ground on Verstappen ahead of him. It meant there was going to be a race for the lead towards the end of the race during the final stint between the 2 leaders at the championship, with the reigning champion having fresher tyres compared to his main rival, or at least that's what we thought was the final stint of the race. It was Mercedes that made a bold strategy call once again, akin to their move in Hungary in 2019, where Hamilton came into the pits from second place with just a few laps to go, to then fly past Max Verstappen in the closing stages of that Grand Prix. So it was all set up for an impressive closing stint in the race, with the Mercedes driver closing Verstappen down for the last 20 laps of the race. Bono was on the radio telling Hamilton that he's done it before, and the British driver went on to put in fastest lap after fastest lap, giving Red Bull no choice but to stay out given Hamilton had closed the pit stop window to Verstappen on his outlap. And once Hamilton got past his teammate and caught up with Verstappen with 6 laps to go, it was an easy overtake for the British driver in the end as he got past Verstappen into turn 1, which meant it became damage limitation once again for Verstappen in second place, with the fastest lap for the Dutch driver. It's got to be said that it was Mercedes who made the right call this afternoon to go for the 2-stop strategy, and let the Red Bull team run their race without being influenced by their strategy calls. It means that Lewis Hamilton has extended his lead once again in the championship fight, with Hamilton and Verstappen in a class of their own this year, as they finished in first and second at all of the races so far this season. I think it will continue throughout the year, given the amount of development is likely to be limited. So the gap between the top 2 is now 14 points, with Monaco coming up for the next race, so it's heating up between the top 2. A woeful circuit layout. The next point to discuss is regarding DRS trains and just how dreadful the Circuit de Catalunya is for Formula 1 racing. That Sector 3 chicane has been heavily criticised ever since its introduction in 2007, as it stops the flow of the lap, creating a gap between the drivers just before they head onto the main straight, and the only realistic overtaking opportunity going into turn 1. Once again, this year the exact same thing happened again, with very little to no overtaking up and down the order. Near enough all of the cars in the field were in DRS trains throughout, so it's a red box for the track and DRS trains, and the circuit layout for me on this occasion. Even Sergio Perez struggled to make moves back through the field after starting the race in 8th position after a tricky qualifying, so it was a real challenge even in one of the fastest cars in the race to make moves up the order. Not only this, but the reprofiling of turn 10 to make it more of a sweeping left-hander rather than a hard braking zone as it was in previous years did nothing positive for the racing. It may well have been designed for motorbikes, but it did absolutely nothing for the Formula 1 cars at the circuit this afternoon, and if anything it made it even more difficult for overtaking in Barcelona. Apart from, of course, for Lewis Hamilton, who seemed to have made a legitimate overtake on Valtteri Bottas on much fresher tyres rather than a team orders overtake, which ultimately cost Lewis Hamilton valuable time in his hunt for the race win. An interesting decision from the Finnish driver who held up Hamilton on his way to victory, and ultimately it didn't make a difference, but I'm sure there'll be a discussion behind closed doors in the Mercedes debrief about that one. There are limited solutions to the track problems given it was safety measures that brought in the chicane in the first place 14 years ago. The frustrating thing is seeing the old circuit still there for all to see, which would solve things from a racing perspective. But there should be options to make the chicane less of a bus stop, just before the cars move out onto the main straight. Having said this, given nothing's been done since 2007, and there have been complaints from drivers, teams and fans since then, I doubt anything will be done about it now. A poor weekend for Alfa Tauri. It seems so long ago that Alfa Tauri were declaring their hopes of being at the top of the midfield at their launch, and after their impressive showing in Bahrain qualifying, which put them in a position to get some solid points for both drivers, there was a lot of optimism for the team at the time. Ultimately, they lost out on that day after an incident for Pierre Gasly dropped him down the order. This weekend in Spain, though, really put them in their place, as it was a poor weekend all round, which I think is deserving of a red box for the team. It started with a dreadful qualifying display for Yuki Tsunoda as he dropped out of Q1 in 16th place, to which he came out and was cursing over the radio about his car, a poor showing from the rookie which he later apologised for on Sunday morning. Although it was all for nothing, as the Japanese driver's car gave up on him at the start of the race in what looked like a pretty catastrophic engine failure, which is certainly not the first incident we've seen this year with Honda power units giving up on their drivers. Tsunoda himself needed a replacement control electronics at the first race in Bahrain, so it'll be interesting to see what the diagnosis is for that element and what that could mean later in the season if the engine parts need to be replaced, and what this means for the other Honda powered drivers, which of course includes Max Verstappen. As for Gasly, well, he had a better qualifying performance on Saturday afternoon for the French driver as he took 12th place on the grid. However, after lining up outside of his grid box, he received a slam dunk 5-second penalty, and a slow second pit stop alongside this didn't exactly help as he went for soft tyres in his final stint. But he finally found some form in the last stint to go from 14th to 10th position to take a single point for the Italian-based team. For AlphaTauri, they'll need to learn from this race and take whatever positives they can to then try and come back and fight in the competitive midfield once again in the coming races. They sit 6th in the championship with 10 points, and it looks like they're competing with Aston Martin behind on 5 and Alpine ahead on 15 at the moment, and this could well be their place throughout the season rather than their lofty ambitions of atop of the midfield. A scrap for the final point. Towards the end of the race, there were cars on completely different strategies, with the battle for 10th between Gasly, Stroll and Alonso getting quite heated in the last 10 laps or so. It was one of the few moments of actual racing between the drivers, which at least meant that the race had a couple of overtakes. So it's a green box for the 10th place battle, as it was probably the closest racing that we saw in F1 this afternoon. There was a close battle in particular between Stroll and Alonso, as Lance Stroll took the place into turn 1 after being pushed off the track by the Spanish driver, to then have to give the place back into turn 3. The controversial move left the Canadian driver under investigation, which is probably because he didn't end up keeping to the left of the bollard as he should have done, but it's really a non-issue as neither driver ended up getting any points in the end. This is because Pierre Gasly, who we've already looked at in this video, made an impressive move and looked like he was flying towards the end of the race to take a single point for AlphaTauri in the closing stages. So at least there was something to talk about from a racing perspective, although racing for 10th is hardly what we wanted to see this afternoon. Perez's struggles continue. And the final point I want to quickly touch on is an amber box for Sergio Perez in the second Red Bull seat. Today he ended up 5th, and realistically the damage was done on Saturday as he only put his car in 8th position on the grid. And when your teammate is out there competing for pole position, I think it says a lot about his performance this weekend to start in 8th. So for Perez, he really needs to start to up his game if he wants to keep Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship. His performances this season have not all been his fault, with the electronic issue in Bahrain for example, and it must be said that still a number of drivers that have moved teams are struggling when compared to their teammates, with Vettel, Sainz, Ricciardo and Alonso all behind their respective counterparts as well. But Sergio Perez is in one of the most important seats on the grid this year when it comes to the Constructors' Championship. It's so easy just to focus on the Drivers' Championship, but Perez plays a pivotal role at the same time. Honourable mentions. I've not got many honourable mentions today, but Charles Leclerc's performance was definitely an impressive one as he took 4th place, and Ferrari as a whole as they took themselves within 5 points of McLaren and put a dent in their lead for 3rd in the championship. It's also worth mentioning Esteban Ocon's sublime qualifying performance, which put him 5th on the grid, although the team's race pace was a disappointment in the end. So there's my 5 things we learned from the Spanish Grand Prix. What did you learn and what did I miss? Let me know in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this video and watched this far, then please do leave it a like and hit the subscribe button for more videos just like this one throughout the 2021 F1 season.